shallow grave. Pray to find the strength to crawl, the strength to climb up to the surface and tie my hands. Sorrow had a purpose, but it's time to stand. 'Cause I just wanna be loved by you. I cannot resist the need to hear you say, whatever you do, I will be there. Son, I will follow you anywhere into the mystery. Love is not a cage, love is not a path. Love's a steady hand waiting the storm to pass. You loved me then when you needed me. Will you still when it's not so easy? 'Cause I just wanna be loved by you. I cannot resist the need to hear you say, whatever you do, I will be there. Son, I will follow you anywhere. We are sons and daughters. We are flesh and dust. We are pulled from the wreckage. We are not alone. We are love is broken. We are vicarious streams. We are tumbling space out of control into the mystery. Into the mystery. I just wanna be loved by you. I cannot resist the need to hear you say, whatever you do, I will be there. Son, I will follow you into the mystery. Into the mystery.
I see the King of Glory coming on the clouds with fire. The whole earth shakes, the whole earth shakes. I see his love and mercy washing over all our sin. The people sing, the people sing. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. Hosanna, Hosanna, Hosanna in the highest. I see a generation rising up to take their place with selfless faith, with selfless faith. I see a new revival.
Okay, good evening, church. How are you guys? Good to see you here tonight. Well, let's take care of a little bit of business before we start off here. Thank you for all those that donated so much candy, because yesterday's Fall Festival Harvest Party over at Arcata First Baptist was a smashing success. Lots of kids, lots of candy, and so much so that the high school decided to not have high school today, the day after. I'm sure that wasn't the reason why, but no, they didn't actually have high school today. So, no, it was a great event last night, and thank you for those of you that gave to that, gave candy to that, prayed for that event to happen. It was wonderful. This is going to be week 2 of this series, Up in Smoke, about the disastrous effects of the cannabis industry. And last week we looked at economic. This week we're going to look at just some environmental effects. Next week, we're going to look at human trafficking and human slavery. The week after that, so this week would be the environmental side of things. The week after is human slavery. The week after that, we're going to have a few folks come in. We're going to have a man named Stephen come in, and he's going to share about a ministry in Africa, in Niger. And he's going to come in as well as a couple who are the Thomases, Lindsay Thomas, and her husband's name, who is escaping me right at this moment, are going to be describing this ministry in Africa. And also joining us in 2 Wednesdays is Jeff and Els Woodkey, because they're going to be describing the ministry. In Jeff's captivity, being abducted and being a hostage for 6 years, there was a lot of, understandably, his captivity has overshadowed, for a lot of us, what the ministry was that they were a part of, and what the ministry was that Jeff was a part of for decades and decades there. So in 2 weeks, we're going to have Jeff and Els and a team of people that were there ministering to the Wadabi people, and they're going to describe, we're going to show a little video, and then they're going to be up here sharing about that ministry. And there'll be some question and answer as well in 2 weeks, so that'll be wonderful. So I would encourage you to come and be a part of that. In 2 weeks is when that's happening. Then 3 weeks from today is going to be Thanksgiving Eve. And how many of you were here last Thanksgiving Eve when we had it was packed in here. Tables, this whole stage was desserts, and it was packed. People were in the hallway, we were trying to find rooms for people to hang out and eat and fellowship and talk. So in 3 weeks, we're going to do it again, but we're going to have an earlier and a later one. So for those of you that don't want to go out when it's late, dark, and daylight savings time and all that coming up next Sunday,
we can eat twice.
You can also come twice, Pastor Joe. Yes, you can come twice and eat twice. But we're definitely going to have one earlier where it's still light outside, and then we're going to have one at the 6 o'clock or whatnot, which will be dark in 3 weeks for certain. So we'll have a back-to-back, if you will, Thanksgiving feast here at Telios. So the next 1, 2, 3 weeks are going to be full. It's going to be wonderful and great. There's been a lot of feedback from last Wednesday night's presentation, as John and Andrea, where are you, John and Andrea? There you are, back there. John and Andrea presented on the economic side, which also moved in some people's hearts and brought up some other conversations, which will probably lead to this series continuing on, but not until January of next year, because we take a little break between Thanksgiving and Christmas on Wednesday nights. But we'll probably revisit this come January for a few Wednesdays anyway. So wonderful. Now, that all being said, we're going to start here. Why don't you agree with me in a word of prayer, and then I'll invite our guests up. Papa, thank you so much for bringing us here tonight. Thank you for everyone that was able to make it, those watching online, listening on the radio. God, I pray that you would inform us, and God, that with that information, it would help us better understand how we can be examples for you in this world and in this creation that you've given to us. God, I pray that you would absolutely bless this time and bless our speakers tonight. We pray this in Jesus' name. All God's people said. Amen. All right, so I'm going to invite now Luke and Ivan up to the stage. So why don't you guys come on up and give them a Telios welcome? Yes. And you guys probably don't need this, do you?
No.
No?
Yeah, we should be good.
Fantastic. I got a stool there if one of you want to sit there and the other one wants to talk. And right about there is a great spot where you'll be in focus.
Well, hello everybody.
My name is Luke. A lot of you already know me. My name is Luke Ludi. My apologies. I have been coming to Telios Fellowship for the last 3 years. I moved up here and went to Cal Poly Humboldt, or Humboldt State University. And I just graduated and ended up joining the Integral Ecology Research Center, which is why I'm here and presenting. We do a lot of work with cannabis reclamation and studying the effects of illegal cultivation sites on a lot of public property. We do some private property, but for a majority of it, it's going to be on public lands. And before joining, I didn't really have any cannabis experience. I swore that when I move up here, I wasn't going to do anything with cannabis. I swore it off. And I'm here. So, without further ado, let's get into some of the slides that we have going. Next one, please. And then, perfect. So I already said the name, Integral Ecology Research Center, IERC. We're a nonprofit research organization founded in 2004. We're stationed in Blue Lake, California, which is about 15 minutes east of Arcata. And our mission statement is to perform ecological research and compile, organize, and disseminate the results of this research in order to increase scientific knowledge for the public, advance the management and conservation of wildlife species and their communities, and enhance overall ecosystem health and conservation. So that was a lot to take in one breath. So I'm kind of going to split it up a little bit here. So our areas of study is going to be wildlife ecology and conservation. In this first photo here, you can see two of our ecologists and technicians holding a fisher, which is a mesocarnivore that is commonly found in our community forests and public lands, but has been in decline recently. The next photo we got here is a mountain lion. We recently finished our mountain lion project that was studying the effects of illegal cultivation in cannabis sites and how mountain lions kind of use them in their ranges. This next slide is going to be a northwestern pond turtle, which is an endemic species in California, and kind of studying the predation rates on them and their nesting sites. And then this last photo here is of Ivan holding a barred owl on our most recent project, which we're using barred owls as surrogates for northern spotted owls to see how these owls are using cannabis sites. We also do some disease ecology and surveillance. I wish we had our other field ecologist here because she would be a lot more knowledgeable in exactly what we do, but a lot of it we kind of study and see which diseases are impacting wildlife, and sometimes these cannabis sites can increase those diseases and their spreading. And then the last one is we use molecular diagnostics and PCR to study the environment. All right, so while we were founded in 2004, we started the Cannabis Environmental Science Program in 2011 with the purpose of identifying the environmental and public health risks from trespass cannabis cultivation on public and adjacent private lands. As of today, we have collected over 500, environmental data on 500 different cultivation sites, and we have organized and led the reclamation at over 250 cultivation sites in California, 38 of which are in Humboldt County, Oregon, and Nevada. We've also participated in many more that we weren't the leaders in it. And then we've also trained several non-agency reclamation teams and national and state park personnel. So that includes other nonprofits or other essentially non-law enforcement agencies. Some local ones are the Watershed nonprofit, as well as the Trinity RCD Resource County District. Thank you. And I think that is going to be it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Ivan, who has been here a little bit longer than me and knows a little bit more. Thank you.
Thank you, Luke. Yeah, so Luke's been a wonderful addition to our team since he's come on board, as evidenced by his wonderful introduction to the organization. Thank you, Luke. So today I'm going to talk about the growing web of environmental impacts from illegal cannabis cultivation on public lands. Just kind of want to contextualize it that a lot of the research that we do is on public lands. It's Forest Service lands, Bureau of Land Management, National Park Service lands. That research extends throughout the state of California, Nevada, Oregon. So it's not specifically Humboldt related, But everything that we see across the entire state is going on in Humboldt. But in order to get that representative sample of what those numbers are, we've had to look outside of just Humboldt County. But I will slip in some information from other research that's not ours as well, that's specific to Humboldt, just to give you guys kind of the full breadth of information that we have available for the environmental impacts from cannabis production. A lot of it is not so specific to private lands, but I do have some data on private lands as well that I'll sprinkle in there. Can you just hit the little next? Oh, bummer. Okay, so on that, okay, there we go. So Luke kind of alluded to how large this program has gotten. We've been to 500 sites throughout the entire state. The program has gotten huge over the last 10 years, but I just want to take an opportunity to point out that it's not just us. We have a lot of collaborators. We have a lot of different partners that we work with. So I kind of just want to give a moment to recognize all of them. The U.S. Forest Service, the U.S. Department of Fish and Wildlife, Hoopa Valley Tribal Forestry. Who else is on there? Trinity County Sheriff's Office, Humboldt County Sheriff's Office, Bureau of Land Management, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the California Animal Health and Food Safety Laboratory at UC Davis. They do all of our toxicology samples, or at least they used to, and developed a lot of those protocols with us. So I just kind of wanted to acknowledge them before we get going, just to so everybody knows that this is a large collaboration. This is not just one small nonprofit in Blue Lake, doing all of this research. We work with a lot of different people. We leverage a lot of different resources, and everybody is providing them so that we can bring this data to you and provide this data to land managers and be able to kind of attack the problem from multiple angles. Okay, so our story starts here with the fisher. How many of you know what a fisher is? Just a quick show of hands. How many of you have ever seen one in the wild? So substantially fewer hands. We kind of like to think of the fisher as kind of a microcosm of what these sites are. They're cryptic animals that are deep in the woods. They're in wilderness areas. The fisher is a forest carnivore. It specifically eats, well, it's an omnivore. It'll eat all kinds of things. It'll eat berries. It'll eat fungi. But it eats, a large portion of its diet is small mammals. So, get the next slide. In 2009, IERC was doing the necropsies for all of the fisher carcasses for all of the fisher tracking projects throughout the state of California. So there's a little GPS collar on that fisher that you see right there. And essentially all of these different projects were tracking fishers throughout the state of California so that they could provide information for potentially listing the fisher on as federally threatened or endangered. And this particular fisher, so then we would take the fishers, we'd bring them back to our office in Blue Lake, we'd perform necropsies on them to try to figure out what happened to them. So this particular fisher was brought into our office. It had no signs of predation. We really didn't know what it was that had caused it to die. So, get the next one. Just a little bit of background on that fisher. Its home range was essentially on the periphery of Yosemite National Park. So really, really mature, old forest, very, very nice. There's no residences around. There's no properties around. It's deep in the wilderness, dozens, if not hundreds of miles from some of these road systems. And in performing the necropsy on it, get the next one, we found that fisher had actually died from anticoagulant rodenticide poisoning, which is essentially rat poison. So it was a major red flag to kind of think about what could the source of that rodenticide or that poison actually be. It's deep in the Yosemite National Forest, and it was really interesting from a science perspective or a problem-solving perspective. Get the next one. So just a little bit of background on what anticoagulant rodenticides are and kind of the risks that they pose. A lot of them are regular over-the-counter rodenticides that you can buy at a local hardware store. They're legal to apply in some agricultural contexts. They're legal to apply per the manufacturer's directions in residential neighborhoods. But what they do is they essentially they make it so that blood can't clot. So any kind of like micro fissures or anything inside of an animal, they end up bleeding out. Let me get the next one, please. So a rodent goes around and it eats a small piece of this and it ends up dying. And then a larger predator, an owl, a fisher, something like that, comes along and eats that. What happens with that rodenticide is it... Ooh. Okay, cool. I think there's a delay on that. So anyway, that rodenticide moves its way up the food chain. So then that predator becomes exposed. That predator has the potential to die. Get the next one. And it continues to move its way up the food chain, higher order predators. Last one. All the way to the point where you can have scavengers and carrion eaters. We have condors here now locally, so they could be potentially at risk as they're eating things that have died just from these anticoagulant rodenticides. So from the bottom up in the food web, you get a situation where these were applied just for small mammals, but they've now contaminated the entire food web. Next one. So in response to that, we had all of these samples in our office, and we said, well, let's look back at all of these samples and see, is this just an isolated incident with that one animal, or is this a larger problem? So for all of the samples that we had between 2009 and 2012, we had published this paper. What we showed was there was 4 fisher deaths. That might not sound like a lot, but this was for the tracking of the fishers across the entire state. So I think that there was only 35 animals total. So a little bit over 10% were dying specifically from this type of poisoning. We still weren't quite sure exactly what was the source of it, but 80% of them were exposed to at least 1.5 or more different types of rodenticides. So that was very, very concerning that there's this contaminant in the food web in these deep wilderness areas that we have no idea what the source of it is, but it's proliferating throughout the entire fisher population. Next slide. So in trying to identify what the source of these were, we were talking to biologists and wildland managers throughout the state. Nobody really knew, but we kept hearing from different law enforcement personnel that there were these cannabis cultivation sites that were deep on the national forests and deep on the public lands that had these poisons everywhere. So it was a relatively common knowledge within the law enforcement community, but they're very tight-knit, and a lot of that information had never gotten out to different environmental researchers, so nobody really knew the extent of the problem. So that was really eye-opening for us, that we had a potential source that we could track down and we could study and see what that problem was, how large that problem was, and any way that we could to try to mitigate those issues. Next one. So from there, we traditionally had a lot of just traditional wildlife projects. We were, working with fishers, doing necropsies, doing a lot of different traditional wildlife work. And in order to implement this type of research, our research teams had to change from just environmental scientists and biologists. Let me get the next one. It's a little cut off, but essentially, we had to develop a network and a relationship with all of these different interdisciplinary, interagency personnel in order to garner the experience and the expertise to be able to attack this problem. So in that photo right there is the 2 executive directors for IARC at the time, the under sheriff for Trinity County, Hoopa Valley forester, 2 pathologists from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, a special agent from the U.S. Forest Service, a warden from the Department of Fish and Game. So we had we needed this broad network of individuals to be able to attack this problem. Next slide, please. So we wanted to continue that research and see if this problem was something that would continue or how big this problem actually was. So that was the 2012 paper. Next one. In 2015, we published another paper. So you see the exposure rates for all of California were only 79%. In 2012, but in 2015, that had risen to 85%. And then as of January 2017, every single fisher that came into our office tested positive for at least one different type of rat poison. So this was very, very concerning to us, and you can see that the problem wasn't going away, it was continuing to increase, so this we knew that this was, potentially a problem that was larger than just the Fisher. So recently, the Fisher was finally listed in the Southern Sierra population, and it is the first animal to actually be listed as federally threatened, actually listing illegal cannabis cultivation on public lands and the pesticide use as a factor that needs to be mitigated in order for it to come off the list. So that's kind of one intersection that our research has with management and how it's utilized and how we're able to take that information and turn it into something useful. So we were very, very proud about that. But that's also how the Fisher became the unwilling sentinel for this problem, right? We see there's one species that is highly, highly contaminated. How big is that problem? Next. So are there other species? Is it just wildlife? Is it environmental media? Is the soil contaminated? Is the water contaminated? What is the expanse of this issue? Does it pose a risk to human health? Local community members are out there. Law enforcement are operating within these sites. How dangerous is it for them to be in the sites? This was another paper that was published in 2018. What we did here was the northern spotted owl is listed as federally threatened. A lot of its ranges overlap, and I have a slide for this later on. A lot of its ranges overlap with kind of the prime growing habitat within California. So in order to get these samples to be able to test them for anticoagulant rodenticides, I'm just going to call them AR from here forward, you actually need a liver sample. So you need a dead animal. You can't just grab a live animal and test it somehow. So testing for the federally threatened northern spotted owl, whether or not it was being exposed, wasn't really an option. But barred owls, there's a lot of them. They're an invasive species. People are actively eradicating them. So we used a barred owl as a surrogate for northern spotted owls because they have their diets overlap a lot. They're eating mice from the same areas. They're kind of consuming the same foods. So what we found in that study, next, is that of the 269 tested, 40 to 74% of them were positive for at least one different type of AR. And we did get our hands on 10 spotted owl carcasses. They had died from people hitting them by cars or just other natural methods. It's like, did I have music on this slide? A little background. So so we saw that 7 out of 10 of those carcasses actually were positive as well, and that jives really, really well with the barred owl information that we had, showing that those were also about 70%. So we felt really, really confident that as a surrogate species, that what we were seeing in the barred owls was going to be also represented in the northern spotted owl population. Yeah, so a lot of them were at the nexus between private timberlands and public land. So we were fairly confident at this point that these illegal cannabis sites were the source of these poisons. In true scientific fashion, we wanted to develop a program that collected information in a structured way for us to be able to identify the extent of this problem. So that's our cannabis site documentation project. So just to give you guys a little bit of background and context on kind of the spatial locations and how some of these sites are arranged and what you can find at some of these sites. Some of them are very, very easy to access. They're right off the road. You could be driving a mountain road and within 50 or 100 yards, there's somebody growing cannabis right there. Six Rivers National Forest is right here. That's the primary one in Humboldt County. And we do have these sites all over the place. So some of them are very, very easy to get into. Some of them are very, very large. This is, when you look at this arrangement here, this is like 14 or 15 different cultivation plots spread out over a mile on the Lassen National Forest. So it's absolutely massive, and there's trail systems connecting them all over the place. And I'll get into some of the features that we see in some of these sites so that you can see some of the environmental damage that we document in them. But they can be large, they can be complex. They can be deep in the wilderness. We have some sites that are 9-10 miles into the wilderness. It requires an 8-hour hike to get into. So there's a big spectrum of where these sites can be located and also how large they can be. So just to go through a few of the features that we have in these sites, people that actually cultivate in these areas, they stay on site. They're there for 6 months at a time. They pack in all of the food that they need. So as you can imagine, 4, 5, 6 people, 6 months of living situations, they're bringing in all kinds of trash. They're bringing in all kinds of food waste. They're not packing anything out. It's just right there on site. They're doing all of their cooking. All of their trash is going right there into the forest. I think we find it's approximately 1,000 pounds of trash for every single site on average. Some of these sites are multi-year sites, so they're growing in these same locations. If they don't get, if law enforcement doesn't get tipped off to it, they don't go in and cut the plants down. They'll grow in the same locations year after year after year, and a lot of times they just dig a hole and they throw their trash right in it. Sometimes they'll throw a tarp on top of the trash for last year, and then they pile this year's trash right on top of that. So these trash pits can be, I've seen them 6 or 7 feet deep, just hundreds or thousands of pounds of trash, food waste. And as you can imagine, and I've got some slides for this later, all of that food waste and all of that trash, it's a big attractant to local wildlife. A bear that's rooting around in the forest, this is going to be a very, very attractive thing for it to go root around in to try to find something to eat. The smell is a lot different than anything else that you would find in the forest. One major thing that they have out there too are water reservoirs and cisterns. So in these areas, in order to grow cannabis, you need water. And in a state where we have a major water shortage, a lot of this water is being diverted. It's being stored in these large cisterns and reservoirs to be stored as irrigation water for later. That's actually me standing inside of one of these, kind of an average size reservoir. So you can see it's 6 feet deep. It's 10 feet by 10 feet by 6 feet. This is a diversion in Trinity County on private property where basically they just built a pool in the creek, essentially, impounded all of the water, and now they're taking the water out to be used for irrigation. But that is private property. The same exact thing happens in Humboldt County all the time. So you kind of see these similarities between the ways that people are growing on public lands. It's the same thing on private land. And just to give you an idea of how large these can actually be, that is a 6 foot tall intern who is standing inside this reservoir. It was about 30 feet long, and the upslope side is about 10 feet high. So you can see the average size is about 3,200 gallons that we find, and the largest one we've ever found is 33,000 gallons. To put that into context, that is not 1, but 2 average-sized residential swimming pools. So I know this is Humboldt County. There's not a whole lot of you who probably own pools, but that's a lot of water. All right, so another major thing is in order to actually to grow these plants, pretty much anywhere, you need space to be able to have the plants. You need space for sunlight. You need space for these plants. A lot of times they go in and just completely moonscape the landscape. They pull out all the trees, all the shrubs, right down to the bare earth. So that both of these photos are on the Shasta Trinity National Forest. And then the next one. But it's kind of the same thing for public land, right? That picture, actually both of the picture on the upper right is in Trinity County. You can see any of the natural vegetation that was there has just been stripped out. It's just been turned into this monoculture of cannabis where there's no more ecological value for it. And then a lot of times what you see is just these large hoop houses. They go in, they raise the ground, they rip out all of the vegetation. They put it in hoop houses just for cannabis plants. That picture is taken in Siskiyou County. Okay, so this is research that came out of UC Berkeley in 2016. What this is showing is that private land sites in Humboldt County, because of the history of cannabis cultivation, they tend to be clustered. So where you have one site, you're going to have multiple sites. And a lot of times these sites, they tend to be in areas that have high ecological value. They're sensitive habitats. They're deep in rural areas. We all know that if you go down random roads in southern Humboldt, you have potential to run into a site down there. And those, those areas the grows tend to congregate in those areas. And those areas typically, they are on the periphery of the national forests. They're areas that were forested land, and they have, they have a lot of wildlife species and a lot of value to them. So this is actually overlapping the quantity of grows in the watersheds. So when you actually look at the watersheds and you look at where there's protected or listed habitat for salmonid species, a lot of these, the higher concentrations of grows tend to overlap really, really well with the protected habitat for these species, because they tend to be in areas that have, more pristine watersheds. They're in the upper, kind of the upper watersheds. So that is, definitely of concern here in Humboldt County, because as I'm going to show you guys, a lot of the, the chemicals and the contaminants that we tend to find at these sites, they're more than likely going to end up in these watersheds. Next one, please. So this is just to kind of give you guys an idea of how this clustering, might actually work. So this is the evolution of a private cultivation community. So this is an area in Trinity County that has a really, really high concentration of private land grows. They have these all over Humboldt County as well, where there's, just a collection of grows in one area. This one is very, very illustrative from the air, though, so I thought that I'd use this one. So this is what the area looks like in 2006. 2012, you can see there's a few more clearings. Okay, we went a little fast, but that's okay. It's the last slide that's kind of the important one, right? So 2012, yeah, so, I mean, you can just see there's a few clearings coming in, and then the next one, 2016, there's a lot more clearing. So that's probably going to coincide very, very well with the legalization of recreational cannabis. Everybody thinks that they're going to get rich. Everybody thinks that they're going to move to Humboldt or Trinity or Mendocino County and live in the Emerald Triangle and make a living. And then by 2021, you have it looks like a timber clear cut. And then as you start to zoom in, you can see that these are individual parcels. So one of the problems that you have, within these areas, and so that's over 400 individual sites, I think just about like anywhere, about 10% of them are in the licensing process. I think you folks spoke last week. I watched the video about what the status of that is. Let me have the next one, please. So this was research from, I believe, 2016, where they're actually looking at what the edge effects are from having a large collection of sites in one area. So what ends up happening is you have all of these clearings, and every single one of those clearings has an edge, right? So you have the clearing, and then you have the forest right next to it. So when you look at it compared to commercial timberland cuts, so say that this is one large contiguous area, and that's a large timberland clear cut. You see the next one? When you have all of these tiny little areas all right next to each other, they actually adds up to having more edge habitat, which is problematic because it's now neither forest nor clearing. You have both of them there, so you have this interplay between these areas when it comes to wildlife. Yeah, so habitat fragmentation was one of the leading causes for the northern spotted owl to be listed on the Endangered Species Act, and that, so those private land clear cutting, or those private land cuttings with all the small little parcels, that's just going to exacerbate that problem. Yeah. Okay. So the problem, if you haven't quite gotten there yet, we have lots of trash, we have lots of environmental damage, lots of habitat destruction happening on land. Get the next one. There's also, I'm going to go through a lot of the chemicals that we find. This is one of the big problems that we find, and one of the major issues that it may be presented not only to wildlife but also recreationists, human health concerns from people actually consuming the products that are contaminated with it, law enforcement officers dealing in these areas. So wildlife. Back one. Okay, so from a public land perspective, one of the big problems is that there are several thousands of these sites that currently exist on just the California landscape. And this is all still just public land. So when you take that and then you blow it up to what the private land, the number of private land sites that we have, the issue becomes even larger. I'll just do like one or two on that. Yeah. Okay, so when we go into these sites, we collect information on a number of different things. We really wanted to establish a very, very scientific and robust protocol in order to collect all of this information. We collect information on water use, diversions. We map out the entire area. You guys saw the map earlier that showed all the cultivation plots, all of the trails. We're looking at the amounts and types of all the chemicals that we find on the sites. And then we're also doing actual toxicology sampling where we're collecting samples of the soil, we're collecting samples of the cannabis plants, the native vegetation, trying to see, what is the contamination that we don't see. Okay, so this was a video. I don't think that it's going to play. Let's just go to the next one. All right, so water use rates. Get that? So there's a lot of debate over what the water use rates are for cannabis plants. I've heard a bunch of different numbers. You guys have probably all heard a bunch of different numbers too. This is the only number that we actually have that we've ever seen published in anything. So we use it, so 6 gallons of water per day per plant. I'm sure that incorporates less water being used at the beginning of the life cycle and then more water being used at the end. Next one. Approximately 150-day growing cycle. So these are the numbers that we use for calculating the water use rates. Next. So about 900 gallons per plant per season. Next. So that is for private land. So when we look at what water use rates that we are seeing on public lands, because they have suboptimal growing conditions, the water transportation networks that they have, there's probably a lot of water loss. There's a lot of holes in pipes, evaporation from these large cisterns. We see that it's about 9.5 gallons of water per plant per day. Okay, this was a cool video, but what it shows is when we go out and we collect these water use rates is we take this flow meter and we take the main inflow line, or if there's multiple main inflow lines, and we actually put the flow meter right on it so that we can calculate how much water is being diverted out of that stream at any particular time. And really this video just shows that like the water that's shooting out of that flow meter is going about 40 feet in the air. It's a very, very, very high flow rate that they're getting out of it. So this is from the Lassen National Forest. Essentially, what ends up happening in a lot of these areas is these cultivators go in and they will impound the streams like you've seen earlier, and they'll divert 100% of the water for cannabis cultivation. So when you look at this, we calculated this at 8 gallons per minute. So he's holding 7 lines. That's 3,360 gallons per hour. A lot of times when these cultivators leave, they don't clean up their mess. They don't pull out their diversions. They leave it in, so typically the water will flow year round. So we calculated that out to almost 30 million gallons per year, which is roughly the equivalent of about 44 Olympic-sized swimming pools. So in a state that has major water shortages, fortunately, we don't have as bad of a water shortage up here, but when you think about the same exact thing is happening in Southern California, Central California, it becomes a very, very large problem. Next. All right. So, like I said, when we go in, we take a look at all the chemicals that we can find. We document all of them. What we find is for soluble fertilizer, there's about 900 pounds that we find evidence of in these public land sites for every single site. So when you think about, the slide that I showed earlier with how deep in the forest that these places can be and how large that they can be, and then you think about somebody hiked in 900 pounds of fertilizer, it's kind of impressive. 9 gallons of liquid fertilizers. Next, we find about 11 1/3 pounds of different pesticides. Let me stay on that one. Yeah. So for those pesticides, a lot of times these are not, some of them are over the counter. A lot of them are restricted use. I'm going to go into a few of those more interesting ones. but they are not being applied in a way that's, per the manufacturer's instructions. They're being applied in a very, very concentrated form. So, you have these areas that have high concentrations of very, very toxic pesticides. And in total, throughout all the sites that we've looked at, we found over 100 different types of chemicals. So it's kind of a witch's brew of different pesticides, if you will, when we get out onto these sites. This is kind of the trend line that we have just for average rodenticide use. So you can see that there was some decreases in 2015, but as of 2021, it's spiked back up. So we are seeing still a lot of rodenticide use on a lot of these sites. The problem has not gone away. We would have thought, or a lot of people thought, that when cannabis was legalized in 2016, that a lot of the cultivation activity was going to come off public lands and it's going to be more concentrated on private land. And you do see some of that, but we have all of the information to show that problem is definitely not going away. And in a lot of cases, it's remaining exactly the same as before 2016. Next. All right, so what proportion of sites do we find at least one type of pesticide? So for public land sites, we find at least one type of pesticide at 97% of the sites that we go to. Let me just stay on that one. Yeah, so this is definitely not limited to public land sites. Of all of the private land sites that we've gone to, within Humboldt, Siskiyou, and Trinity County, that number is 90%. So I should kind of contextualize that a lot of times we are going to sites that we've been specifically called in by law enforcement to come and help them out. So it's probably not a representative sample of private land sites and how many people are using different kinds of pesticides. Just want to point that out because usually we will go to places that they are not in compliance. Law enforcement is showing up to essentially cut down their plants, but 90%. One pesticide I want to talk about specifically is carbofuran. This is the most toxic carbamate pesticide that is manufactured. It is banned for legal uses in the United States, Canada, and the European Union. It's a very, very high toxicity. A quarter teaspoon can kill an African lion. So that same quarter teaspoon could kill a full-size black bear. So probably half of that it would probably take for a human being. Next one. Yeah, so it is not it was previously manufactured in Pennsylvania, then shipped to Mexico, and then brought back up here. I think they're going to stop manufacturing it in Pennsylvania. But all of these, you can't buy carbofuran in the United States. So it's actually illegally smuggled in by people from other countries. This became a really big thing in the 90s. There was this huge expose on 60 Minutes because African bush farmers were actually using it to poison African lions from getting into their ranches. That's how they have the number on why it kills an African lion and not a black bear. Okay, next. Okay, so how are they used? The plants are directly sprayed or it's applied directly to the stalk. One of the problems with this is carbofuran is a systemic pesticide, so it actually absorbs into the plant material itself and it'll bind to the plant cell, right? So then you think about, these contaminated plants then making it into the hands of somebody who's actually going to consume it, it becomes a public health risk because they're then consuming, this highly toxic pesticide. Okay, so this is the percent of public land sites where we find carbofuran or any banned pesticide. So only pesticides that you cannot, pesticides that you cannot buy over the counter. You can't find them at Ace down the street. Everything has to be either brought in illegally from another country or you need an applicator's license in order to use it. So as of 2013, 2014, we felt that our data collection methods were really, really solid. We knew that we were capturing everything on site, so we just continued to see an increase in the amount or the proportion of sites that had these pesticides every single year. And as of 2018, it looks like it's pretty much kind of normalized between 70 and 80%. I'm sure that those little blips, aren't statistically significant, but we are seeing, a very, very high use rate at these sites that's not going away. Yeah, let me get the next one. Okay, So when we actually look at these pesticides are being applied, and we wanted to see what is the contamination rates of the soil, of the water, what is the actual environmental damage that's being done by these pesticides. Next. So for the 10-year period between 2014 and 2013, we visited 402 sites throughout California, Nevada, and Oregon, collecting over 2,600 samples. Just to give you an idea of kind of the scope of this program and what we've been able to accomplish with our partners and collaborators is every single one of those samples costs about $300. So we're coming up on about $750,000 just in toxicology samples to be able to inform what the scope of this problem is throughout the western United States. There's kind of a map in the upper right hand. It does show some of the sites that we collected samples at within Humboldt County. One of the things about Humboldt County is that there's actually a lot less public land here than in some of the other areas that we work in. So unfortunately, a lot of the data that if I was giving this talk in Trinity County, I'd be able to make it just Trinity County centric, but you can kind of see where that is on there. Next. Okay, so for water, let me get the next one. So we looked at water contamination immediately downstream of these sites at 44 different complexes, and we found that 16% of them were contaminated. It doesn't really sound like a lot, 16%. When you take that and you expand it to the entire area, the entire state, the entire western United States, and you think that there's 3,000-4,000 of these sites, 16% becomes a very, very large number very fast. And since these are public lands, they're yours, they're mine, our taxes pay for them, for somebody else to be contaminating that water, that's, just 1% would probably be unacceptable. And when you think about where these locations are, all of the, immediately downstream of these sites are sensitive habitat for salmonid species, amphibians, and, amphibians that we have nowhere else in the entire country. They're endemic just to California. A lot of rural water use. A lot of these rural communities, they pull water directly out of the streams. So that becomes an issue for them. For soil, so 60% of the complexes that we tested were contaminated for at least one pesticide for soil. And then the plants. So these are the actual cannabis plants themselves. So of the sites that we tested, 50% of them are producing cannabis that is contaminated with at least one type of pesticide that will then be consumed by the end user. So it then becomes not just a forest problem or an environmental problem. It then becomes a human problem. And where's it going with that? Yeah, so with the water though, the water in the plants, it also shows that the pesticides aren't just being isolated on these sites, and they're not just staying on their sites. They are being mobilized into the watershed. They're moving to other areas to contaminate other things. Next. Okay, so how long do these pesticides persist? At this point, we have done a long-term monitoring project in the Plumas National Forest where we've actually detected, at least at trace levels, carbofuran 6 years after the initial or the last application in soil. So, kind of bringing that back to, the issues that you could have locally, within a Humboldt County. Say somebody moves in and they're going to grow, they're going to cultivate on an area. They apply these pesticides, they end up not making it in business, they move out. That land could potentially remain contaminated for multiple years after they've moved out. So this was let me get the next one too. Next. I won't go over the methods too much, and I'll kind of jam through this one, but this was a paper that we actually published last year. It was looking at positive detections in water downstream of these sites, and the bad news is we did find both carbofuran and diazinon in the water, and they're both very, very toxic to aquatic communities. I guess the good news is if you look at the x-axis on the bottom, that's how far that water had to travel over land in order to reach our sampler, and then on the y-axis, it's how far it actually had to travel in the stream. So that little red box is kind of the maximum distance that we were able to detect pesticides. So it seems like there is a potential, and more research will need to be done. This was the foundational paper where we showed that water was being contaminated from these sites. So there is additional research that will need to be done to see what the extent or the downstream longevity of that transport is. But we only detected, pesticides approximately 150 meters downstream in the stream. So, whether or not it's being diluted or broken down, we're not sure. We're going to continue to build off of this research. Okay, so what we did was we put cameras up at a lot of these sites. We wanted to see what was using these sites, how were they using these sites, what were they getting into. So using these camera surveys, we detected carnivores at essentially every single site, fissures at most of the sites that we set cameras, definitely fissures at any of the sites that are within really good fisher habitat. And often these animals are coming in and they're rooting through the camps and the food trash. They're rooting through the trash pits. We do see bears more frequently than basically anything else. They're kind of pests. They go all over the place. I don't have the slide for it, but we have kind of shown that, one, we're seeing animals at much higher concentrations in these sites than compared to control sites. So these sites are bringing in the animals, or they are being attracted to them. The next one. Hey, this video is going to play. All right. So that is a mountain lion walking on a grower trail into one of the sites. So they've essentially created these highways or these pathways directly into these sites that a lot of the wildlife are using. Next one. Okay, that one was a fisher rooting through that fertilizer bag. Next. Okay, so this is a great horned owl that we've seen on site. There's another fisher. Let me one more. Okay, so this is kind of a sad but very telling story here. So you see in the upper left-hand corner, there's this black bear that is walking down this grower trail. It's basically facilitated bringing this bear directly into the site, and this bear is getting into all of the fertilizer, all of the trash. And if you see in that last photo in the right, the bear is covered with this pinky chalky substance. It basically got into a bottle of carbofuran, ripped it open. More than likely that bear probably did die from that exposure. We don't, it walked off camera. But it's just showing that, these sites are attracting animals into them because of the food, and then all of the pesticides, the fertilizers are mixed in with it. So it kind of facilitates these exposures. Yeah, so we have found 90 dead animals out of 85 sites that we did this particular study on. Yeah, half of the locations that we went to. So this is kind of the breakdown. It's not just the contamination. It's also, these people are out there for months on end. So they get bored. A lot of them are young. They've got guns. They're shooting and they're poaching wildlife. Sometimes the wildlife are pests. They're coming in and they're messing with their plants, so they just want to eradicate them. But so between the shot wildlife and confirmed or suspected poisonings, that compounds on itself. We had a small project that was funded by the Mule Deer Foundation, where we were actually looking at game species and whether or not game species were also being contaminated. So essentially, we would just ask hunters to send us liver samples. And we did see that we did have two liver samples for 2 black bear, 1 mountain quail, and also a deer. Tested positive for these poisons. So not only is it a problem on the forest or an end product cannabis user, it's also hunters, and they're they're going out, they're hunting these animals, and then they're bringing it back to feed their family with. And that poses a potential human health risk. And then just the trash. There's just tons of trash all over the place. That picture in the lower right-hand corner is in Siskiyou County. It's right in the shadow of Mount Shasta. That's Mount Shasta in the back. A lot of times the private land sites, at least that I've been to, they actually have more trash than the public land sites because they can bring it in with a car. Whereas the public land sites, they actually need to backpack it in. But all of that trash, what we find when we clean sites up is we see diminishing rates of how much trash we find for every year that it's been left to just be on the landscape, because the trash is getting covered up by duff, it's getting moved by wind, moved by water off of these sites. So, all of that trash is essentially ending up in the forested areas. Another risk that we have is wildfire ignitions from some of these cannabis cultivation areas. So this is the La Brea fire in 2009. This was started by a public land cultivator. The Hearst fire in 2018 on the Shasta Trinity National Forest. Next. And the Dolan fire. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with the Dolan fire. It was down on the Los Padres National Forest in the Ventana Wilderness, and 12 federally endangered condors ended up dying from it. It's a very, very bizarre story if you guys have the time and wanted to look it up. But these 3 fires, we already have a large enough fire problem in the state. We probably don't need people out there, setting these as well. And when you look at what that actually costs the taxpayers, next. So the total suppression cost for those 3 fires was over $100 million. So if you think to yourself, what could the state do with $100 million? That becomes a problem. Okay, so this is specific. What this research was from last year, they're looking at where private land licensed or in the permitting process grows are in relation to wildfire severity. So this is not just a problem with public land cultivators. If you look in the upper left-hand corner, it shows that in comparison to other agricultural products, cannabis cultivation occurs much closer to wildfire perimeters and in wildfire hazard zones because it tends to be in these rural areas that are, off the beaten path. It's not in the Central Valley. It's not in Napa Valley. See the next one? All right, so when you look at this, it's showing the proportion of sites that are within very high, and moderate fire hazard severities. The 4th one from the left is Humboldt County. So, 90% of the private land licensed sites in Humboldt County fall within either a high or a very high fire hazard severity zone. So, there's potential for ignition there. It's a lot of those grows are right on the wildland urban interface. Okay. Yeah, let me get the next one. So one thing that we've done too is we have this amazing network of law enforcement partners and partners all throughout the state, and we have put together essentially the most comprehensive data set of these site locations anywhere in the world. And using those sites, we're able to overlay environmental variables, aspect, slope, to try to predict, where are the higher likelihood growing areas? What areas, are more conducive or preferable to public land cultivation? Yeah, so this is okay. Yeah, let me get the next one. So then what we do is we take, those predictions. We get essentially a layer that says, this is really based off of other locations where people have grown. This area is very similar. It has a high likelihood of having a grow in it. We take that and we overlay it on, either critical protected habitat or home ranges. We can kind of see what is the potential risk to different species. So when we take this locally and we overlay it on the Humboldt marten habitat, you see that there's a 44% overlap of the Humboldt marten habitat with either high or moderate likelihood of public land cultivation risk. Next. This is for the Pacific fisher throughout basically all of California and Oregon. So again, 44% overlap, including 81 of 83 home ranges in the Southern Sierra. You guys will remember that I had mentioned that the Southern Sierra population is now listed on the endangered species list. So 81 of the 83 home ranges of those fishers, have a high likelihood of potentially, being within range of one of these sites. And then the northern spotted owl, which is also federally threatened, there's a very, very good overlap between the owl habitat and the good growing habitat, essentially. So what can we do with that information? We can take that information to prioritize areas and species for conservation. So we can take that, we can say, well, there's fishers in this area and there's northern spotted owls in this area and we have a lot of grows in this area. Let's take our funding and our resources and focus on cleaning up grows here. or just providing that information for different land managers and the acquisition of high-risk areas. So if something does become available, trying to prioritize purchasing that land. Get the next one. So I know Luke had alluded to it previously. The word reclamation, that essentially means to just clean these sites up. So one of the big things that we do is we go into these sites and we remove all the trash. We have all these numbers for how much irrigation pipe is in these sites, how much trash is in these sites, and we get that because we've actually taken the trash, removed it with a helicopter, and weighed it. It doesn't clean up the environmental contamination from the soil if it's there for multiple years, but it is a way to mitigate the risk of bringing animals in, and it's the first step to allowing those areas to naturally recover. I don't know if this is going to play, will it? Okay, so that did not play. Just hold it right there. What that did show, though, was essentially all of these sites, they're so far out in the wilderness, most of them, 95% of them, we actually have to get a helicopter and remove it. So that was just a video of, us essentially flying out like 700 or 800 pounds of trash in one helicopter load. So I've talked a lot about kind of the problems that we see, and that's kind of the solution that we're at right now, is just going in and just removing the trash from these sites and allowing it to naturally rebound and naturally restore itself. In 2018 to 2020, we received $1.06 million from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife to clean up. We ended up cleaning up 204 grows within the Klamath, Shasta Trinity, and Six Rivers National Forest. We were very, very proud of this. So when you look at this was what the map looked like. All of these red dots is a different public land grow. Just click it once. The blue dots are everything that we cleaned up. So we felt pretty good about ourselves. We made a dent. This is just one ecoregion. The next one. Well, when you expand that to the whole state, you can kind of see that this is a much, much larger program, or a much, much larger problem that's ubiquitous across the entire state. It's going to take a lot of resources, and it is something that, we've tried very, very hard in order to inform the public on, because I think that it's a very underknown environmental problem that we have. But this is a major, major problem throughout the entire western United States, and that map kind of shows it there. So that's all the slides that I've got right there. That's our website. If you guys wanted to go and look at any of the publications or the research that we have, there's a donate button on there if you want to help support us. Thank you for your time. If I have time, I'll go ahead and take questions.
Yeah.
But I appreciate it.
Questions, we can ask Ivan or Luke.
So does law enforcement go in first, shut these sites down before you guys go in and reclaim them?
So there are a number of different approaches that we take. Typically, if it's like we're actually going in and it's the day that they're going to cut everything down, we'll just hang out on the road, they go in, they catch people, they do whatever it is that they do, and then we go in and document it. Interact with any of it. So then we have to come back, 6 months later, once, a lot of that contamination's kind of burned away. But we work very, very closely with law enforcement, and the short answer to that is yes. They go in first, and they secure the site, and then us science people go in after.
Is there any correlation between the level of pesticide use and whether it's a cartel grow or not?
I would leave that for law enforcement personnel to answer. I don't have the specific data to be able to answer that.
Are you familiar with John Lope? He was the Siskiyou County Sheriff.
I think he left right when I started coming.
Okay, well, he gave us a good lecture here at the Arcata Veterans Hall, and he said that every single cartel grow had that pesticide in it, and he wasn't. Answer that.
So I guess,
There we go.
yeah, there we go. Yeah.
It sounds like you're talking a lot about illegal grows. On the flip side, the legal grows are they inspected annually, or the ones that are out there for pesticides and what have you? Are they self-monitored as far as?
So because we deal with environmental damage, we typically deal with sites that are not in compliance. So I don't have that information either. That would be more of the compliance regulatory and Humboldt County Sheriff folk. I would hope so.
I would hope so too.
There's a state agency called the DCC, the Department of Cannabis, California
So they're going around and.
Compliance. They are supposed to regulate all that sort of stuff, so they do have spot checks. I don't know how frequent or what the cycle is, but, and there is also a website you can go and, if you have a complaint against a legal grow, you can submit your complaint so that they can go and investigate that.
I think though that the infrastructure and framework in place, even with the legal market, still leaves room for some of these plants to make it onto that market. There is loopholes, gaps, in California and Oregon. I think in Oregon, the state published a report on the state itself saying it can't even provide the most basic level of protection for human health conditions.
Where did your funding come from?
I'll take it.
So that's a great question. We get a lot of funding from different agencies. Like Ivan was saying earlier, we kind of collaborate with a bunch of different law enforcement agencies. So oftentimes our funding is federal. However, like the game project that we were studying, we'll also have some smaller donations coming in from private agencies like the Mule Deer Foundation.
And what's your budget, your annual budget?
It's about $1 million.
Okay, so
Yeah, we're a small organization. We do a lot with what we have and the resources that we have, but we look for money everywhere. We have cooperative agreements with multiple state and federal agencies, but we also still go out and try to find money for ourselves. Like Luke was talking about, we've got money from Mule Deer Foundation, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation. Some of these hunting groups that recognize that this is a problem and it directly affects their pastime and their mission statement.
Church, how about we give Ivan and Luke a big round of applause. Thank you. Thank you so much, you guys. That was extremely informative. And, there's sometimes anecdotal things, but I appreciated the research and the data that you presented today. And I know that we all do. So that was an absolute blessing. I just want to share for a little bit, and I do mean a little bit here. As Ivan and Luke were sharing, just a couple of things that came to my mind. There's sometimes you'll see Christians that'll go, you know what? It's all going to burn anyway. Well, okay, and I think they're referencing this verse right here, 2 Peter 3:10, which says this: "But the day of the Lord will come like a thief, and then the heavens will pass away with a roar, and the heavenly bodies will be burned up and dissolved, and the earth and the works that are done in it will be exposed." I don't have any argument with that being reality, but that is not an excuse to not care for the world that the Lord has given to us. And we just need to understand that as a reality. And I want to show you a few verses that the care for what God has given to us. Sometimes it's the thought of like the cannabis industry. It's like, as long as it's not hurting anybody. Well, I just want you to see that there are actual real consequences, some of which were presented today. Real consequences whose extents continue on. All the way in the first chapter of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and 27, God says this: "Then God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female, he created them. And so God puts humanity in authority over. Dominion doesn't mean it's not take advantage of. You've been given a responsibility. God has given human beings responsibility over the creation. And it goes on and says in verse 28 of Genesis 1, God blessed them, and God said, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." God has given a mandate to his creation, to humans, to take care of what he has given to us. there's even really practical things when it comes to the creation that God has given to us. Leviticus 25, 1 through 5, here's some verses. The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai, saying, "Speak to the people of Israel, and say to them, when you have come into the land that I give you, the land shall keep a Sabbath to the Lord." And this idea is just use the land, use it for everything that it's worth, and just take every resource from it and leave it trashed. No, in fact, God goes on and he says in Leviticus 25, verse 3, "For 6 years you'll sow your field, and for 6 years you will prune your vineyard and gather its fruits. But in the 7th year there shall be a Sabbath of solemn rest for the land, a Sabbath to the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap wheat. You shall not reap what grows itself in your harvest, or gather the grapes of your undressed vine. It shall be a year of solemn rest for the land." So even for the Lord, God's like, be a good steward. Be a good steward doesn't mean absolutely decimating the creation. And here's one more passage that it's in a song. In Psalms 8, verse 3 through 8. "When I look at your heavens, the work of your fingers, the moon and the stars, which you have set in place, what is man that you are mindful of him, and the son of man that you care for him? Yet you have made him a little lower than the heavenly beings and crowned him with glory and honor." What an amazing thing about God's creation and God's creation of human beings. But then he has something for human beings in the rest of this. "You have given him dominion over the works of your hands. You have put all things under his feet, all sheep and oxen, also the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the fish of the sea, whatever passes along the paths of the sea." God has given us a responsibility. And I hope that I pray that as we have been going through some of these weeks and next week as well, we would see that this industry that's right here has disastrous effects in our community. And for the person that just goes, it's not really hurting anybody, it has real consequence. So I want you as a church to be praying about it. I want you to understand and to be a good steward of what God has given to us, because we do have to answer to God for it. And we have a responsibility for that. I know that next week we'll talk, not a light subject either. We're going to talk on human trafficking, human slavery, right here in our area. And I just want, again, the light to be turned up so we can see some details about what's really happening, so that we don't go around with our eyes closed going, "Oh, everything's just fine." I'm sure there's some issues, but I think everything's just fine. No, things aren't fine. There are real things that we as a church need to be praying about, and that you need to get involved in as the Lord would lead you to be involved in. So thank you for letting me say that for just a little bit there. And again, a huge thank you to Ivan and to Luke. Very much appreciate you guys. If you'd agree with me in a word of prayer, we'll close it out tonight. Papa, thank you so much for gathering us here again tonight. God, thank you for the beauty of your creation, the intricacy of how you have made things, the detail. As our tools have gotten more powerful, we could see further into space, or we could see smaller into the details in the subatomic world. God, we see intricate detail and design. God, we thank you that you care for your creation. God, I pray that we would be mindful of what we've heard today. God, I pray that we would be good stewards, and that we would understand the responsibility that you've given us over your creation. And God, I pray for a restoration of the lands, of the creatures and the animals, of the ecology, in this beautiful place that we live. What a beautiful place that we live. God, I pray for those who are involved in the cannabis industry and who are thinking about making the next buck, thinking about how this is going to be the thing that changes their life, and yet are leaving a wake of destruction behind them. God, I pray that you would reach them, Lord, and that they would have a moment of clarity to see things as they really are. I thank you for those of us here that used to find ourselves in that place, and God, you gave us a moment of clarity and opened our eyes to the reality. We love you, God. We thank you again. We pray this in Jesus' name. All God's people said. Amen. Amen, church. Thank you so much. Thank you for coming out on this night. And again, can we give a round of applause here to Ivan and Luke?